So, if fear decrease involves Pavlovian processes, interventions should target Pavlovian processes. Altering Pavlovian processes involves altering the predictive value of a stimulus about the occurrence of another. Again, it would be altering the predictive value of the conditioned stimulus about the occurrence of the unconditioned stimulus. One way to do this is to introduce safety signals. Safety signals indicate the absence of the feared or negative outcome. Its presence, according to theory, it's detrimental during exposure procedures because it is expected that fear may return after extinction. So let's go back to our example of the person who fears dogs. If that person undergoes exposure therapy accompanied by another person, in this case it would be a safety person, it is possible, according to theory, that once after therapy is finished and that person who fears dogs encounters the fear stimulus, it is possible that he may experience intense fear again. So in general, it is advised not to present safety signals during fear extinction. However, this hypothesis has barely been tested in humans. It is not clear what is the effect of the presence of safety signals during fear extinction. Castro, Labrador, and I conducted an experiment in order to evaluate the effects of the presence of safety signals during fear extinction, and we found that safety signals do not interfere with fear extinction in the long run. And this is consistent with findings that safety behaviors have benefits during exposure procedures. Specifically, it has been proposed that the presence of safety behaviors may help exposure-based procedures because they prevent patients from experiencing unnecessary emotional distress. They may help reducing dropout rates from therapy, and additionally, they may help individuals to approach fear-provoking stimuli more quickly. In addition, it has been found in laboratory studies that individuals diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder have an inability to respond to safety signals. An analog of a real-life situation of this description would be the case of a person who has returned home after being at war, after experiencing a traumatic experience, and it is possible that that person may be exposed to a loud noise. That by itself may provoke a very strong startle response, may provoke physiological activation, and that person may have an inability to read that in that particular situation at home there is no actual danger. So the person may be experiencing an inability or may be presenting an inability to read that actual situation is safe. This perspective is consistent with the idea that people with emotional disorders have a propensity to focus on negative events and an inability to disengage from negative content. The underlying neurological substrate of this observation is that these people likely have a hyperactivation of the amygdala and a hypoactivation of the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is a structure in the brain which is associated with fear acquisition and with fear expression, whereas the prefrontal cortex is associated with emotional regulation. So it has been proposed that individuals with anxiety disorders may have a hyperactivation of areas related with fear, as well as hypoactivation with structures that are in charge of regulating emotions. So if this reasoning is correct, it is possible that patients may benefit from training on focusing on safety signals during extinction. So focusing on safety signals may not be counterproductive during exposure-based procedures. Finally, I would like to address a very interesting line of research that is about consolidation and reconsolidation. Traditionally, it has been assumed that after consolidation, memories are stable over time, that they do not change much. And this is consistent with the idea that exposure therapy, as we know it today, is not assumed to erase or to modify fear-related memories. This explanation may account for the fact that sometimes, in some cases, fear reappears after exposure therapy. So sometimes it's observed in clinical contexts that individuals who finish exposure-based interventions at some point may experience some kind of recovery of fear responses. However, there is a possibility that every time a memory is evoked, it needs to be reconsolidated or restored. Every time a memory is reconsolidated, information enters a labile prone to change state. So imagine, for instance, in your computer you have a Word file. As long as your Word file is closed, it is not possible to modify it. But once you open the file, you may write a couple of words, you may delete a couple of paragraphs, and then you have new information in your open Word file. As long as your file is open, it is in a labile state, it is possible to introduce new information. Then, when you're satisfied with your changes, you click on Save. Once you click Save, that would be the analog of the reconsolidation process, the restorage process. Then you close your file, and that file contains now the new information you updated. Now it's reconsolidated, consolidated again, and it's no longer at a labile state. So that would be the analog explanation for the reconsolidation mechanism. So extinction during the reconsolidation stage has been proposed as a feasible mechanism to introduce new information, and actually it is possible for from this perspective to erase memory, to modify memory, something that is not likely to happen during exposure-based procedures as we know it today. So the clinical implications of interventions during the reconsolidation stage would be that emotional memory could be erased, and it would be prevented the reappearance of fear responses after exposure therapy. It is noteworthy that the declarative knowledge would remain intact. So, for instance, if I were in a very bad car accident, I may still recall the traumatic experience. The declarative knowledge would still be there, but the emotional valence, the fear associated, would no longer be present. And something that is very interesting is that the memory trace in the brain seems to disappear when exposure takes place during the reconsolidation stage. Finally, I would like to present some conclusions. First, although there are treatments that work, exposure-based interventions have proven to be very effective for a number of anxiety disorders and fear-related problems. We do not know the underlying mechanisms responsible for fear reductions. In other words, we do not know why these interventions work. And probably this is due to the gap between basic and applied research. Basic research may help understand what are the underlying mechanisms that are responsible for fear reduction. And this is very important because understanding what are those mechanisms may help refining treatments, may help us come up with treatments that are more effective and that work better for people who suffer from anxiety disorders and who experience fear-related problems.